Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Tamsin Green. This is Lisa Finley, and we're from Heatherwick Studio, and we're here to talk to you again about Coal Drops Yard. So the project is part of a much larger regeneration of industrial land in King's Cross in central London, and our brief was to create a retail destination at the heart of this new development. This is the site. The buildings were built in the 1850s to receive and transport coal, and there was a big fire in the 1970s which burnt out the whole northern section of the Eastern Coal Drops building, which is listed. So the buildings have been heavily adapted over time. They spent 100 years as warehouses, and then in the 1980s they became the home to the very messy London club scene. So our approach has really been to see how we could build on this very rich history and see our next step in the story as something that could secure the long-term future of the buildings, whilst also making the site fully publicly accessible for the first time in their history. There was a couple of key challenges with converting these buildings for retail use. The first being the very large distance between the two existing buildings, which is not conventional in a retail setting. The second being the long length of the site and strong north-south axis, which very much encourages people to kind of walk through the site rather than stopping. So we didn't really know what retail would be doing in 5 years when we started the project, but we did know that in order to get people to go out to physical places to shop, it would be about people and human interaction and providing some kind of focus that got people to interact beyond just a shopping experience. So our approach was to see the existing buildings as very porous to allow things and people to move through them. And this was especially important given that the site has no one front door, but it's accessed from all sides. And the buildings themselves were built for trains and horses and carts, and not for people. So whilst the yard level lends itself very well to smaller individual units accessed from outside, the viaduct level was much more challenging, with the internal floor up to 1 metre higher than the external public realm. So looking at the section of the buildings, we knew that getting the circulation to work would be one of the keys to the success of the project in making it a pleasure for everybody to explore. So we worked very closely with Arup Engineering to retain as much of the fabric of the existing building as we possibly could. And so we lowered the existing fabric of the floors down to the level of the outside and created this continuous datum which connects into the surrounding public realm. And if we'd stopped here, we would have created something a bit like a Covent Garden, but with such a much-loved retail centre already existing in London, we felt that in order to secure the long-term future of this site, we needed to do something much bolder. So we started to think about how we could introduce a third level onto the site, something that would create this sense of theatre and a sense of place for this place. And very importantly, also signal that there was something happening behind the long length of these existing elevations. So how could we do all of these things? So what unlocked the idea was just the simple curling of a piece of paper. And this gave us a way of working with the existing length of those long roofscapes to create something which felt like it was coming from this place. And it was at this moment that we started to talk to the planning authorities. And whilst they supported the bold ambition of the project, they didn't like the idea so much. So we went a little bit back to the drawing board, working with sketches and models, and what became very clear from working together with them was that maintaining the identity of the two individual buildings was essential to whatever came next. So working with the individual roofs of the building, we started to peel them until they touch in the centre, and we call this the kissing point. And what this does is allows us to place the majority of the mass towards the north on that fire-damaged part of the building, to maintain long lengths of the existing elevations to the south, and also create this central covered public space which can be used in all weather, and to create the largest anchor store to the site, which is 2,000 square metres, increasing the critical mass of retail to around 10,000 square metres.
So in terms of how we constructed the design, we had a really in-depth dialogue with Historic England and Camden Council, and they were really supportive of it, but they said, provided you don't add any additional load to these existing structures. So the way we did that, if you peel back the layers of the building, is we introduced these two curved trusses that connect at the centre, and then they peel down and touch and connect with the existing roof trusses at either ends of the building. And this roof structure is supported by steel columns that thread through the existing building on either side of the cross walls down onto mini piles. So essentially this new intervention threads between the old. And these steel trusses also hold the new upper level floor. So that new floor is hung from the roof, and you can see these vertical steel rods that support the floor. And that was really important to create this really open public space underneath without any columns, and also so that you had this illusion of this new space being emerged from within the existing roofs. And so this project was a design and build contract, and we had really early involvement with contractors and specialist fabricators working through key details like this. So we produced these kind of sketches to work through key moments in the design. This moment is where the sloping roof comes down and meets the existing roof, and where the new steel structure meets the timber. And this is a moment where the roof peel terminates and the copper standing seam meets the glazed roof lights. So a lot of this project was about off-site, high-precision prefabrication coming together with on-site traditional craftsmanships and trades. And this is a moment where all of those elements come together. And we had some really interesting learning experiences, particularly about slate roofing. We never received a single drawing for how that slate roof would be done. We just sort of had to trust it. And although it might seem quite simple, that surface is changing in angle, it's changing in width. And we learned a very interesting fact that slaters can only slate in one direction, and the program meant that we had to have both roofs being slated at the same time, so the contractor had to hunt for a left-handed slating team to kind of compete with the right-handed slating team on each building. And we worked through details very early on the upper-level glazing as well. We knew that curved glass would be completely out of the question, so we developed this folding, kind of faceted design that folds around the steel hangers, and it's a self-supporting system. And we worked through key details that would work its way into the contract, and we tested the scale of these in our workshop to test what the human scale of these folding bays would be like. So there was a really close dialogue between the structure and the architecture, really close coordination. And we also worked very hard to make sure that the new elements that we were bringing into these buildings were of very high quality and would somehow sit well with the existing heritage context. And our approach to restoration was really to have a light touch. We didn't want to kind of lose the feel of these buildings, and we wanted all the layers of history to still be there. And we also wanted some of these really interesting moments like the capstans and the canopy brackets to stand out. And it also sets a great character for retail. So in terms of where the retail is, this is the yard level where there's a lot of individual units, around 50 to 100 square metres within the existing buildings. And we also introduced, at the bottom of this plan, small new build elements which are around 20 square metres for smaller up-and-coming businesses. This is the mezzanine level, and at each ends of the coal drops we had anchor units, so they occupied multiple levels of the buildings, reusing the existing levels. And then the viaduct level, we had more individual units. We used existing mezzanine levels for service floors. And then we had the new anchor unit at the top floor, which is the largest anchor unit. It's 2,000 square metres. And that unit bridges between the east and the west and connects the two buildings. And we had to discreetly introduce servicing for these buildings, so we managed to do that within the existing envelope and do things like reuse existing chimneys and slightly widen the apertures and use them for ducts. And we introduced 6 cores with lifts and stairs so that the accessibility of the project could work. And we had a very sort of stripped back palette for these new insertions, so just exposed concrete, and decided to focus on a sort of small element in that space, the lift buttons, where we worked with the foundry to develop patination and molds for these elements. And so for us as a studio, we've been in King's Cross for 25 years. It's been a very special project for us to have something in our neighbourhood and to see how this space has been used in different times of the year, at different times of the day, and to see how retailers have used these spaces and taken on a life of their own, and to see some of the smaller scale spaces come to life as well. Thank you for listening.
Shall we watch the film or speak?
We're just going to let this run in the background.
You want us to ask questions now?
I can stop it.
No.
Should I let it run? Okay, I'll let it run. Oh, go back.
No, should we?
Goodbye.
Okay. My first question is about the facade system that appears to be in the accordion-shaped glazing. Can you tell us a bit about that? Where is it located in the building and why?
Yep.
Just the upper level?
That
Did they
big
mention it?
retail thing. The kissing corner.
Yeah. So do you mean the glazing to the upper level? Yeah, so that, the whole move of the roof peel opening up, that concertina glazing closes that opening. And the planners were really keen that we had a really clear view through that new upper level roof space. So we designed a glazing system that could be kind of self-supporting, so you wouldn't have mullions and it wouldn't kind of interrupt the view. So it's self-supporting, and then they frame each one of the hangers that support the roof. And it kind of breaks down the scale of the space as well, so you get, it's almost like kind of individual bays through that space.
You started the presentation by saying that the problem was the great depth and length of the space, which is not your standard retail space. In the end, you wound up not putting anything in the middle that would force people to the sides. You just counted on the attraction of your big move to draw people in, or it looks like you might have planted some flowers in the middle. How did you get people to do their work in the stores, i.e. buy stuff?
So I think we approached the building as we would a piece of urban design, and we saw that we were providing a setting for things to happen rather than dictating too much how that space would be used. So we liked the idea that it could be used for a performance or it could be used to stage an event, but equally it could just be used for informal things to happen as people get to know this part of the city.
I'm talking about the space before that, the outdoor space.
The southern part of the yard.
Yeah.
So we saw that also as an extension of that. So it's a kind of sequence of public spaces that could be used for different types of things.
But how did I'm just trying to understand your logic, since you set as your design parameter, we have a problem, A, it's very long, B, the outward wings are too far apart for normal retail rules. So I understand you made an attractor instead of an altar, you have a store. But what did you do, or did it turn out not to be a problem to have to push people to the sides?
So we had also some other constraints that we haven't talked about. So the whole of that southern yard is used for all of the servicing of the whole site.
Okay.
So in the early hours of the morning, from 6 till 10 a.m., it's full of deliveries and waste. So there's up to 10 vehicles that would park there. So it stopped us from being able to put anything permanent in this space because it would have to be removed on a daily basis. So instead, we saw it as a place where temporary things could happen, but that would have to then be removed to allow the buildings to function.
And somehow the stores are attractive enough that people go there.
Well, yes, and
Yeah.
ultimately that comes down to the mix of retail and also the programming of the spaces and what happens there.
All right, one last question. The retail space looks quite grand and beautiful, but most retail spaces want lots of walls and lots of places to put things. How does that work?
Well, I guess we were working with some of the spirit of the existing buildings where they're not necessarily the most conventional retail space, and it's a space that has its own character already. And I guess we felt that that upper level could have a character of its own and not to produce a retail space that was kind of blank for somebody to do something. We felt there was space for it to have its own character.
And it is now used by some sort of big store.
Yes, so it's currently Samsung are in there, and it's a concept store.
Yeah, and I think on that, when we first came up with the concept design for the building, our client Argent went out to the retail market and tested that floor plate because they were aware that it was highly unconventional. So they went out and talked to retailers about how they would use the space and made sure that retailers would respond to the challenge of an unconventional floor plate. And I think the response to that was very positive from the retailers, which gave the client the confidence to move forwards with the project.
Looks like those are empty.
Did you say that for the upper floor, the kissing area, the Samsung shop is going to go there or not?
Yes, they're in there now.
They're there now.
Yes.
Yeah, they opened after we gave the presentation. So they opened in September.
But in a way, you know, when you talked about the Covent Garden experience where you wanted to go, I mean, you wanted to go away from that model in a way. Then I thought that this idea of bringing these two buildings more closer to each other, that had to do also with a more public argument. But it became in the end a commercial argument. Why then was the kissing moment so important?
I think for us it's both a commercial and a public argument. So we were trying to do two things with that one move. So we were trying to create a focus in the centre and a covered outdoor space, which is quite rare in London. And we were also trying to increase the amount of retail. And so in the scheme in total, we've got 5 anchors. The 4 are at either end of the cold drops. They're around 600 square metres. And so it was really interesting to find where could we have space for a larger anchor to get that mix of really small scale units to a really large one.
No, I understand, but there was never a discussion about making that as a kind of third square in the air or something like that, where you could have cafes, restaurants, so that you really would see the public sitting there and be interactive between that. What you said was an alternative to the Covent Garden model.
I think what's quite interesting about how the retail is used in there, it is quite a public offer in a way. So it's. At the moment, it's a unit where you don't actually have to buy anything. It's a cafe. You can spend time in there. It's a concept store. So it's not. I think the retailer that has been attracted to that space wants to use it more as a public offer than just a straightforward retail unit. And so we're really pleased with how they've taken that space on in that spirit.
Okay, clear.
I think this kissing process is helping for the branding. So many people will come here, and that's the retail is dying. Everybody's saying, and these things which Apple Store started many years ago. I think when Samsung will be there, so that will be in images and all the telephones. I think as an architect, I cannot do something, but you can do something like this, and I'm happy you are there also.
I'm just struggling a little bit to figure out what is the impact of the architecture of this project compared to a conventional retail mall in that place. What if the same parameters had been handled by the average architect? How has this changed the outcome? What is the impact socially? What is the impact on retail? What is the impact on King's Cross?
I think one of the things we've thought about, rather than thinking about this versus conventional retail, it's more thinking about the long-term prospect of these buildings. So this is a site where it wasn't even on the public's radar at all. So I think it's what was the use for these buildings that could bring people here, and the roof could not be there. It could still be a retail destination, but I guess it would. How much of an attractor would it be? And I think from the client's perspective, they felt that they really had to create a draw and a really sort of new retail destination to make sure that people would come to these buildings and it would be worth the investment that they've put in them, because they've invested beyond a sort of certain lifespan. They've really put a significant amount of investment in these buildings, which were really, really in disrepair.
How much this?
I couldn't possibly say.
Thank you very much. And the project's working, by the way.